Look at the buildings.
Hello, ça marche? It works. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Let me briefly introduce the panel. We have here Dr. Iman Bibars, Head of Middle East and North Africa Office for Ashoka, an American foundation, working to ensure that the social entrepreneurs inspire new generation of local change makers to create positive social change. Author, international development consultant, she's co-founder of the Association of the Development and Enhancement for Women, the first organization in Egypt to provide microfinance loan, especially to female heads of households. She's also an activist. She has been supporting the Arab Awakening and is personally involved. She was in Tahrir Square during the days of the revolution, speaking with other activists, hearing the stories, and writing books about them. Here is Annick Cogent, journalist pour Le Monde, which is a big and very well-known French newspaper. She started working for the newspaper Le Monde at the age of 23, and she's still working there today as foreign correspondent. That is to say that she's very talented. And she's interesting in everything, as evidences her articles and books from 80s scribbled to the situation in Libya, Lady Diana or Simone Weil. Annick Cogent likes to portray people and situations. She received the Albert Londres Prize in 1996 for her reporting memories of the Holocaust and is now president of the Association Albert Londres. In September 2012, she released a book, Les Proies, The Prey, which reveals how the Libyan tyrant Muammar Gaddafi used prisons, beauty parlors, and weddings to find women to become his sex slaves, told through stories of the sufferers. We will, of course, talk about that and about testimonies later. And here is Marwa Daoudi. She's departmental lecturer in the politics and international relations in the Middle East, in Department of Politics and International Relations, and the Middle East Center at University of Oxford. Her research addresses resource-based conflicts, international security, conflict resolution, and political reform. In 2011, she was awarded a fellowship by Princeton University to join the Woodrow Wilson of Public and International Affairs as visiting lecturer in international affairs and victory research scholar. In parallel to her academic work, she provides strategic advice and excuse me, and consultancy to multilateral organizations and the private sector. For instance, she's providing advice on the Middle East peace negotiation for UNDP, as well as consultancy briefs and executive training in conflict and negotiation for international organizations like UNESCO or European Union. And then a man, because we love them too, Tom Porteous is Deputy Program Director at Human Rights Watch and is based in Washington, D.C. He joined Human Rights Watch in 2006 as the London Director responsible for communication and advocacy in the United Kingdom. He has a background in journalism, diplomacy, and UN peacekeeping. In the 80s and the 90s, he was a freelance correspondent for the Guardian newspaper, BBC, and other media. First in Cairo, later in Berlin, but also Algeria and Morocco. He worked in UN peacekeeping operations in Somalia and Liberia. He also served as conflict management advisor for Africa in the United Kingdom's Foreign Office from 2001 to 2003. He supervised actually 5 of the organization's research divisions, including Middle East and North Africa division. And of course, you don't know me, so let me introduce myself too, with a few words. I'm working for AFP, which is one of the biggest world news agency. I'm based in Paris. I'm deputy chief editor in AFP, responsible for Africa. I joined AFP in 1999. I've worked for numbers of years in Africa. I headed the Kinshasa bureau from 2005 to 2008. So I covered different conflicts, of course, in the area, in the Kivu region, Eastern Congo, but also in Kinshasa during the post-electoral violence period. And after that, I came back to Paris and working in the international service. And from there, I went several times in Africa again, and in North Africa, after the beginning of Arab Spring, especially in Tunisia. Well, I'm half French and Tunisian, and for that I had the first occasion in my life to go and work in this country, which was a big surprise for me. After the short film we saw, and this not so brief introduction, let me just present you how we will debate, because we have some debate with the panel, and then we'll have a period of half an hour for the question, if there are questions in the audience. And after that, each of the panel will take around 2 minutes or 3 minutes just to intervene on one point, which is very important for each of us. Well, freely choice, of course. Has the Arab Spring become a desert storm? We all remember the day Ben Ali left Tunisia. Could hardly believe it. Few days after, it was Mubarak's turn. We had, at the time, the feeling of a sudden and global movement, uprising, revolt, spreading in the Arab world. We called it Arab Spring, and that's part of the question today for us. Today, less than 2 years after, the issue is now to rebuild a social pact in those countries. In countries where the Islamist movement, who are not at the beginning of the revolt and the uprising in these countries, have taken power. And some of them have been elected, some of them have not, but they are obviously the main force in the society today. They capitalized on the revolution's legitimacy. But will they be able to respond to the demand linked to the revolt? Bread, employment, respect, freedom, and respect of the rights linked to the former and sometimes dictatorial regime, as the women's rights. First of all, I'd like to ask maybe to Marwa Daoudi, what are the roots of the discontent, and how does this link with the political and regional context? And after that, maybe, how can we explain that the Islamist fundamentalism in some of these countries took power in all the countries where this kind of uprising occurred in the name of dignity and freedom? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, for your introduction and for moderating this debate. The title of the panel is challenging. I mean, why Desert Storm? One could challenge that. I mean, I see the game, the words also, like the Arab Desert and the Desert Storm operation, but one should also put the Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening, depending on how one wants to call it. And whatever we call it, we're just witnessing a very powerful and important movement in the Arab region, in the Middle East more broadly. And in my view, it's very important to look at the roots of discontent. There's no blueprint, of course, because each case is specific and each case had its different response. However, one commonality, one common element one could highlight is the call for justice and dignity, and this is very important. Rising against social and political injustice. And if you recall the first banners that were put up in all of the different movements, be it in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Syria, in Bahrain, were about karama. Karama in Arabic is dignity, meaning restoring people's dignity vis-à-vis very oppressive systems. Then it moved on as the repression unfolded to changing the regime. But one had to start first by looking at social and political injustice. And why is that? Because the region was characterized by the haves and the have-nots. Clearly, it was an economic injustice also. Despite economic liberalism, there was no really opening of the society to everyone, and Mohammed Bouaziz's gesture was very symbolic in the sense that he was voicing his protests of unemployment despite having been educated. And of course, this was igniting a revolt throughout the region. Just to give you a figure only, 1/3, for example, in Syria, 1/3 of the Syrian population lives on $2 a day or less. This is very important, and people feel they are not part of the system. There have been, of course, IMF-led neoliberal reforms, but they have benefited, again, some inner circles of power, some local elites. So claim for karama and repression intensifying, fear of the system opening up. Why now and why suddenly? It's not a sudden revolt. One has to look at the terrain. The terrain was very fertile for asking for karama and economic and political justice. There's a feeling that unfairness was coming from authoritarian regimes, clearly, who also benefited from Western protection. And this is very important to realize. Of course, the Mubarak regime in Egypt could not have continued if it didn't receive massive external rent from its allies, external allies. There's also a feeling of collusion on other issues which, for the people of the region, pertain to a general feeling of injustice. The unresolved Palestine question, the continuity of the occupation of Palestinian territories with the support of external powers has also ignited the revolt felt on the part of the people. They were rising against a general context of unfairness. We're talking about the Iraq war, so the invasion, destruction of Iraq, the war against Gaza in 2008, the war in Lebanon, and the Arab-Israeli conflict and all of the different conflicts which kept on being felt in the region. So clearly, there was a culture of resistance which was built, which is amazing when you come from the region to see that they managed to uphold this culture of resistance despite very brutal repression. And we've seen like success stories and transformation now. We'll have to discuss how much of a success in Tunisia, Egypt, the ongoing revolution in Syria, and the repressed revolution in Bahrain, between different examples. What is important, and I'll end here, is the people felt for years that they were victims of a system that they were not able to change. They became empowered, and this empowerment is very crucial to understand how they manage, still today, continue resisting a very brutal army in different contexts, and also to see this as a crisis, a conflict, but also an opportunity for change and for restoring their dignity and shaping the future of their society.
Can I answer? Yeah, of course. I would like to answer why the fundamentalist won, or we can call them Islamic Muslim Brothers, we can call them whatever we want to, but in any case, why did they win? And what is fascinating is that if you read the Western media, if you read a lot of people, to a large extent, even some Egyptians believe that they won because they have a huge social base, which really is not that true. I work in the streets. I am not academic. I just work in the streets. I work in the squatter areas, in the rural areas, in the very strange areas in Egypt that a lot of people, including my own family, haven't even seen before. So it is not true that we cannot deny they're organized in comparison to others, and we cannot deny that they do have access to a lot of people, but really not as much, and not the reason why they won. There are several reasons why they won. One of it is that, yes, we were just discussing this before this session, that there was no leadership in the revolution. It started as an uprising. When I went down to Midan Tahrir, it wasn't with an idea that Mubarak will go. I went there because kids were being killed right and left, and we're not used to our kids being killed or murdered in that terrible way. So we went there to support the young kids to be there. So there wasn't an idea, let's go and get rid of Mubarak. We were happy to get rid of Mubarak at the end, but that was not how it started. But there was no organization. There was no leadership. You know, and that is very important. While the others had leadership, and they hijacked it on the 18th of February. We got rid of Mubarak on the 11th of February, and they hijacked the revolution on the 18th of February. And so this is very important, and they were not there. I was there the whole 12 days out of the 18, and they were not there. You can tell if you know them, you know how they look like, and you know who they are, and you know how they act. They were not there. There might be some Egyptians with sentiments to the Muslim Brothers there, but they were not there. So I will briefly say what happened. What happened was after they hijacked the revolution, there was no leadership on the secular side, and there was even some fights between the seculars. But more importantly, they had a deal with the army. Everybody kept on attacking the army, but the Muslim Brothers had the deal from day one. And I'll give you examples of what happened. The first thing was the changes of the constituencies, the districts. When you are elected, you elect an MP, a parliamentarian, based on a particular area. Suddenly, it was expanded for no reason from 250,000 to 5 million, the area. So instead of me going there and running for an area, for example, with 250,000 people, suddenly I was faced of running for 5 million people with many streets and so on, which means I have to have a lot of money to put one banner in every street. Who has this money? The second one, not only did they just redistrict the areas, but they surrounded every area, which is upper class, upper middle class, middle class, concentration of Christians, concentration of Wafd, which is another party, with low income areas. So when they were doing the redistricting, there was no plan of saying, okay, every 5 million and you think they're objective. It was very clear. We did the mapping, we looked at it afterwards. It was always a surrounding. Somebody gave the army a very clear map of Egypt of how to be able to get the majority to a particular group. So it was not done haphazardly or without intention. So this is the second. The third thing was the amount of money. We went and monitored a couple of villages. Each village, now we know Egyptians are stopped counting at 90 million. So each village the smallest village has at least 20,000 people. I mean, this would be like, they have nobody. I mean, this is the smallest one. So each village cost them $10,000 a day. And I count 66,000 Egyptian pounds, which for an Egyptian is 5 years of salary, you know? So this was food and rice, and mainly for the very poorest people. And the final thing, among others, was the fact that they also had religious slogans. If you don't vote, you go to hell, for us. Not only this, and this is my final thing so that others can speak, but in one area in Luxor, we found that the Copts, the Christians, voted for Hizb al-Nur. The Nur light is the Salafi Hizb, you know, the ones with the beards and the galabiyas and the right wing of the fundamentalists. And then we asked them, how could you vote for them, you know, because the Salafis are anti everybody who is not even their type of Salafi. Because the Salafis went and told them, in Egypt, the Virgin Mary is called the mother of light. So they went and told them, because they don't know how to read and write, that the party of the right is the party of the Virgin of light. So anyway.
Thank you very much. You said that this revolution had been hijacked by the Islamists. To understand that, I think that there's nothing better than to tell stories, to explain what you've seen. Maybe Anik, you can begin with your experience in Libya, and we try to understand what happened to women, because they were there. The Islamists were not in the streets. I was in Tunisia. I didn't saw them just after Ben Ali's fall. They came after. I think it was exactly the same in Egypt. And what happened in Libya?
Yes, that's very interesting, because I'm not a specialist in that area at all, but I was absolutely stoned looking at reports and photographs and different films about these revolutions, especially about Libya, and not being able to see at least one woman. We could see, at least in Tunisia, they were combatants. You could see them in the streets, and you could see them, you could hear them, and their speeches were very loud and strong. And in Egypt, you could see them, even they had so many risks in place, Square Tahrir. But in Libya, there was no even one woman. And I talked to my friends, men mostly, and asked, did you see women? And they all said, no, we had never access to any women in Libya when we were following the front and the war, etc. So I went there at the end of the revolution, wanted to know what happened about the Libyan women. I mean, of course they exist. What did they do? Did they fight, etc.? And the bloody campaign to overthrow Gaddafi was, of course, mainly a men's war. But really, I discovered there was a vital second front dominated by Libyan women, and they were denied the role as combatants, of course. But they did everything but fight. Also, they fought very many times in lots of occasions. They raised money for munition and carried bullets past checkpoints. They helped treated the wounded, the injured fighters in makeshift hospital or in their homes. They stole lots of medicine and prepared and cooked food and drove cars through different fronts with the injured or with kids or with women who had been raped. They spied on government troops and relayed their movements by code to the rebels and even to NATO. They just did incredible thing. And they were, a rebel told me, the secret weapon of the revolution. And that was particularly risky, I discovered, for them, because of course they could be put in jail or they could be killed, just like the men. But the first thing they were risking was rape. And I discovered how rape was very, very important and a real threat for them, and was used by Gaddafi troops and soldiers and militias, etc., like a weapon of war. And it was very difficult to discover that and to write about that, because you couldn't see the victims. And even talk to people from UN Rights Watch, and they say, be careful about that subject, because, you know, we don't see victims. We can have 10, 12, maybe women have accepted to talk, but we don't find them, so be careful. And of course, I was suspicious also, and I really tried to get to have access, because to write a story I needed to find some victims, and I couldn't. And but different people told me lots of things, and I was sure, and I know there were thousands of rapes, and you know there were some reports now, and even the former Minister of Justice in Libya told me they found, you know, Viagra boxes and lots of things. So it was really planned and organized, and that's going to be a case for the International Penal Court. That's not tribunal, but that was the first thing I discovered. And looking for victims, I just happened to meet one day, a young woman. She was 22, she's 23 now, and her name is Toraya, and she told me just an incredible story, a personal story, but that drove me to another subject and gave me just a glimpse on the way Gaddafi was treating the woman, on the contrary of what was shown and what was very many times or very often believed in the Western media, where he was appearing sometimes like kind of feminist, surrounded, you know, by the armored guards and passionate female guards. What Soraya told me was just a story of a little girl. She was 14. She just turned 15 when Gaddafi visited her school in Sirte. You know, this is his hometown. And they had been told by the headmaster that be prepared tomorrow. You know, this is a big honor. The guide is supposed to visit the school tomorrow. So be careful, be wonderfully dressed, etc. And she was there. She was exciting, of course, and afraid. It was everywhere, and everybody was. Lots of people were, especially in Sir, treating him just like a kind of god. And she was picked among the most beautiful girls to give a bouquet, some flowers to the guide, and she did. And he just looked at her from the bottom to the head, very coldly, I see, and put his hand on her head. And that was a sign she discovered later that for the bodyguards to say that one, I want her. And the next day, some 3 women came to her home and asked her to come with them, saying to her mom that, you know, the guide loved so much the bouquet, saying that they would like, he would like her to do it again. That was very strange, of course, but there was no option to say no, of course. And she was brought to the desert. They drove for a couple of hours, and then they were to his compound, tents, etc. But he was in a car, big how do you say, a camion, caravan, something like that. And there she was, you know, prepared just like a lamb, sacrificed lamb, as she says now, and shaved and prepared. And she has some supposedly sexy dress. And she had also a blood sample, a blood test was made, but that was what he was doing to every woman who would be supposed to have some relation with him. And then she was pushed in his room. He was naked, and she thought it was just a terrible mistake. But no, of course not. There was a gang around him preparing the girls for that and just offering the girls. And well, she fought. That was, of course, I won't say the details, but a couple of days after she was raped, and just explained that her former life was finished, and that she was going to spend the rest of her life with him, with Gaddafi. He would be his brother, his father, because all the girls were supposed to call him Papa Muammar, and he was going to be his lover, his husband also. And she stayed with him in a kind of cave, how do you say, le sous-sol, basement of his residence in Bab al-Zazia in Tripoli, and she stayed there for 5 years with a group of girls, other girls amongst 30. It's difficult to know because they were not allowed to go in the other rooms, of course, but each time she was leaving the compound, she had this, you know, this costume of, she had a uniform, like the other soldiers, supposedly known as soldiers. The bodyguards, there were so many comments around that, about that in the European press, but most of them were just his mistress and sexual partners or things. Yeah, slaves. Oh, yes, slaves. Obviously, well, some were just for a couple of days, but some were for weeks, some were for years. And I had difficulty with the word harem, but I guess we had an image of the harem for a long time, which was maybe given by the Orientalist painters, etc. But of course, that was tough. And so he has the harem. But above the case of Soraya, and she gave me a testimony which is just unbelievable day after day of what she suffered for years. Above that, I realized I came back and spent it was 3 months in Libya last winter. I discovered that there was a whole system of sexual corruption, and it is in this incredibly conservative society, sex and rape was a weapon of power for Gaddafi, who was a predator. He picked women, girls everywhere in villages, in schools, in university, in weddings, etc. He was always looking for films, videos, pictures of young girls, but also he used sex to govern, to dominate, and to dominate the men related to the wives and to these girls. So he was doing the same thing with trying to get or to rape when they resisted the wives of his opponents, of his ministers, of his generals, And also about, that's another question, but about also the wives of the head of states who were visiting his country. Even when he was visiting the other African countries, for instance, he was also trying to get the wives and the daughters. That was, he wanted to be the king of the kings of Africa, so that was a way. It couldn't be, of course, the king, but at least to dominate and to get the wives was a way to have the feeling of dominating the whole continent. So it was a whole system that I discovered, which of course had a big influence on the situation of the women in Libya. We didn't know that because rape and sex is such a taboo. When we say taboo in France, we have the feeling it's just an embarrassing question, but that's not the meaning of taboo in Libya. That means it's a question of death or life, and of course to have, if one girl or if one man, because he was also raping men, if one of them had said something, it would, of course, would have been killed or dishonored first if he was saying that in his family. And the girls were rejected when they were saying the truth. They were just pushed out from their family, had to hide, etc. Lots of them have become prostitutes in different other countries in Libya now, and have and live in fear that their terrible little secret is going to be known. So, well, this is just an insight about the situation in Libya we didn't know, I think.
Thank you very much, Annick. Just before I give it to you, I think that what you described, and you were one of the only one to describe it, and that's a fact. I mean, she was one of the only journalists who wrote about that, because it was very difficult to find the facts, to find the people who accepted to talk. And for me, it's one of the big issue for Libyan society now, and not only the Libyan one, because the taboo is in the whole Arab world. And if we can't face this kind of issues, that's a big question for society itself. That's a big question for the place for women tomorrow in this society. That's a question for transitional justice in this society, and we know that justice is one of the big issues today, and we'll have the occasion to talk about it later. But just wanted to underline this, and maybe you can give us your testimony about Tahrir Square also.
Thank you. Well, I just want to add a couple of things first. Well, the first thing is, I just want to comment on the film, which was very good and very well done, about the Arab awakening, not spring, awakening in the Arab world. I really don't like the word spring, and it was really coined by the Americans anyway, but it's really the Arab awakening. But the pictures of Egypt are not the whole story. I mean, of course, I know it was a strong one. There wasn't a lot of women there. But I have a presentation, and many people have other presentations where there were a lot of women in Tahrir Square. I mean, there were as many as men. Now, when there were combat, the men, the Chevalier Egyptian men would stand in front of us or in front of the young girls so that they can protect us. But there were as many men as women during the 18 days. Not necessarily afterwards, and there were martyrs that were men and women. So it's very important. Saying that, and before I just also mention what happened in Tahrir Square, I like to say that rape was a tool by Qaddafi in before and after the revolution, but also during the revolution, the Masrat case. Most of the cases are not there because their family killed them. A lot of the girls who were raped were killed by their families afterwards. Yeah, because it's a shame, as you know, in the Arab world. So a lot of them were. So not only were they raped, but they were also killed by their own people. But we also want to remember one thing. There is a young girl, 14 years old, in Pakistan, who was shot by the Taliban because she was educated. So I mean, I think that we should remember, and I think that this forum should take a stand, and I think that we should not let it go. She was just shot, I don't know how many days ago, yesterday, was it? Yeah. By the Taliban because she dared become educated and a spokesperson and vocal about her right to education. So, you know, we should not let it go. In Egypt, in the Constitutional Committee, one of the Salafi guys proposed that girls get married at 9. So not only will they be raped for the sake of of politics, she will be raped for the rest of her life. All these girls. I don't think that as women, not regardless of nationality, I don't want governments to get involved, but as women, we should not let that go. I mean, really. And what happened in Tahrir Square, we have many stories. And actually, there is a book I wrote it about women in Tahrir Square. But I also would like to share what happened to women after Tahrir Square. Because everybody kept on saying, why are you raising this issue of women in the Middle East? This is a Western agenda. You know, why when the Balkans had a revolution, there was no mention of women? In the Balkan, nobody came up after the revolution and said that women are a sin, or that women are a disgrace, or that women should not be in politics, or that women should be at home. You all read recently and seen on the newspapers and the Times, I think, about the sexual harassment. And whenever we talk, they tell us, oh, but there was always sexual harassment in Egypt. This was always the case. It's a different type of sexual harassment. What happened during, especially after the fundamentalists took over, is organized, collective, violent sexual harassment against veiled and covered women, who, with the intent, so they're not even women like me, they are women who are having a scarf or having a veil, like you, exactly, and they are doing this against them. So it's not sexual, it is to get women out of the street. And they tell them that. When women go and complain, they tell them, go back home, why are you in the street? There is a sexual harassment of women in the metro, which is the underground, in the car for women, and they tell them, go home. This is saying this. I will share with you one story of one woman in Tahrir Square. She's a woman, she's covered, she comes from a rural area in Egypt, and when I saw her, I said, idiotically, forgive me, but I said, because there were some veiled women there, but not a lot in Tahrir Square. So I said, good, you're from the Muslim Brothers, you know, again showing how stereotypical I am as well, right? So she looked at me and said, why do you think every veiled woman is a Muslim brother, you know, or Muslim sister, or, you know? And I was like, no, I didn't mean to. I was very apologetic. And she said, no, I'm an Egyptian woman. I cover my hair because I think it's right, but also I come from a rural area. And I am here because my son has been in jail forever. And my son's only crime, he was not a fundamentalist. He just went to a mosque where the fundamentalists are there, and the police took him, and he's been away for 8 years. I have no idea where he is. I don't know what's happening. I heard that you guys are here, and I wanted to come to protest. I want to protest for dignity. I want to protest because not only is my son away for 7 years, but I decided my husband is dead, and I decided I want to live, you know, to earn a living. So my daughter and I decided, what do we know? What do we do? We sew. They make clothes. So we decided to have 3 machines and start the sewing. And we called the new school beside us and said we're going to do the uniform. But then the wife of the head of the National Democratic Party in my village, in her village, decided that this is a lucrative business, so she took it away from us. So they took her son. They took her living expense. She could not complain. When she complained, they arrested her and her daughter. They put her in the police station for 3 days. And suddenly this not very well educated woman with her daughter who is 17 or 18, who were living a simple life in one village, became rebellious. And they decided to come and stay with us in Tahrir Square. And I mean, this is a woman who is not a Muslim Brother woman. Her son was not. And I met her son after he was released from prison. He's still not a Muslim Brotherhood guy. So this is a nice story.
How about those who are not veiled and are getting raped right now because we have to be veiled? I'm talking about women.
Yeah, well, I cannot say that anybody's raped in Egypt, and we don't use but I can tell you that we are being harassed, and we are being, of course, Christian women are being beaten if they're not covered in Egypt.
Yeah, maybe Tom, you can answer about the question about repression and violence against women especially, but also I would just to expand, yes, about the strategies for activist group and civil society now against repression by existing regimes, and also I mean Bahrain, but not in different countries. What strategy can activist groups pursue to continue human rights campaigns, and the same question for the countries in transition. What role for human rights, civil society, lawyers association, women in political movements in Tunisia, for instance? Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me here as the token man. One of the themes of this conference, this forum, as we heard this morning, is development 360 degrees. And I think that the horrific stories that we've just heard from you, Annick, and the sort of somewhat depressing picture that is beginning to emerge, actually, really, these are the result of really, really failed development over many, many years throughout this region. And I think we have to remember this because on the film we saw this morning at the plenary session, we heard Aung San Suu Kyi saying that this is about Burma, that this is the beginning of a new era, and whether we achieve what we want depends on us, men and women. And I think in the Middle East, one could say the same thing, but we have to remember that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint, right? The events of the last 18 months in Egypt, in Tunisia, throughout the Arab world are historic. In Egypt, for example, we saw this summer, and I want to be a little bit positive here, that for the first time in Egypt's history, you had an elected civilian president. He also happened to be a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. But this was the first time in Egyptian history that had happened. Not only that, a few weeks later, he removed from the head of the Egyptian army, General Tantawi, and the second most powerful man in the Egyptian army, Sami Anan. And this was a move against the army that was historic, didn't just go back to the 1952 military coup by Colonel Nasser, but actually goes right back to the beginning of the 19th century when Muhammad Ali took power in Egypt, massacred all the Mamluks who then ruled Egypt in the aftermath of the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt. So that's just to give you a sense of how historic what is happening in Egypt is, what is happening in the whole of the region is. And I think that we've also got an idea from the speakers already about how complex the situation is. It's very, very complex, and it's still going on, right? And it is, as I said, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So what should, in the light of that, what should human rights organizations like mine be doing? I mean, just to be, again, a little bit more positive, or at least kind of ambiguous, there's an aperçu by Albert Camus, appropriate that I should perhaps quote Albert Camus here, where he said that the moment of greatest hope is also the moment of greatest danger. And I actually read that just at the time when I was starting my new job as the Human Rights Watch program director, responsible, among other programs, for the Middle East, which happened to be in January 2011. And by the way, my boss said at the time, "Oh, you can take the Middle East and North Africa, it's really quiet at the moment." And I've been thinking about that the relevance of that remark, over and over again, throughout this, very turbulent period, because this is a moment of great hope. There's no doubt about it. The people in Tahrir Square, and I was there on February the 11th. I actually arrived that morning to see the overthrow of Mubarak, and there was this huge amount of hope in Tahrir Square on that night. But it's also, as we've seen in Egypt, but also more dramatically in Libya, and more dramatically still in your country, Syria, and elsewhere, in Bahrain, for example, it's also a moment of great danger. We've seen literally thousands of people killed. And let's not forget that. And they're killed because they are striving basically for freedom and dignity. That is what they're striving for. So what's the hope, okay? The hope is for societies that are run by regimes that are not repressive after decades of repressive regime, societies that are run by states that basically respect the rule of law and promote and protect human rights. That's actually quite simple. The fear, I think, is a bit more complex, and one has to sort of break it down into three parts. First, there's the fear that this terrible model of development that we've seen for the last decades in the Arab world, which is totally unsustainable. There's no going back to sort of Mubarak-style politics, okay? Let's forget about that. That will continue to subsist in some countries, and it is subsisting. It's subsisting in Bahrain, where there was an uprising which was brutally repressed, and you still have the same people in power. It continues in Saudi Arabia, where women are regarded as not just as second-class citizens, but actually as children, legally treated as children under the guardianship laws of Saudi Arabia. It subsists in many other Gulf countries. It subsists in the Middle East. It continues in Iran, of course. The second, so the fear there is the maintenance of the status quo. That's one area that human rights organizations have to continue to work on. The second is the fear of chaos and conflict. Okay? This, of course, was the fear that the Mubaraks of the Middle East relied on in order to maintain their power for many years, because they always said, well, if it's not me, it's the Muslim Brotherhood, it's the Islamists, and so forth. And we do have conflict. He was right to a certain extent. We do have conflict and chaos. We have conflict in Syria, terrible conflict. We have a certain amount of chaos in Libya. They're free of Gaddafi, but the government does not have any control over the militias, and you have the militias detaining people without any kind of judicial review, torturing them, and we've been trying to document that. So that's the second fear. And the third fear is the fear that transitions, where they succeed in places like Egypt and Tunisia, will actually lead to forms of autocratic government, maybe run by Islamists, maybe not run by Islamists, but forms of autocratic government that are actually no better than what went before. Okay, so there are good reasons to be fearful about what happens in the Middle East. I think that in terms of what we can do to address all three categories of fear, if you like, categories of danger, to use Camus' word, is to do what human rights organizations do best. And that is, first of all, to document human rights abuses in as much detail as possible. I'm very impressed by the work that you've done, because Human Rights Watch had several people in Libya throughout the last 18 months. We've had people almost continuously in Libya, and we found it very, very difficult to document this particular subject, and we're having the same problem in Syria at the moment, and I think it's partly for the reasons that you gave. So documentation, and that's very difficult in conflict situations, but we've just got to persist. We've got to get in there as close to the ground as possible to talk to the victims of human rights abuses, the witnesses to violations, and even sometimes the perpetrators of violations. In Syria, we've spoken to defectors from the army who themselves have been forced to carry out torture, and they've been some of our most useful sources of information on torture. So document, and then put it all in a report and get it out into the public domain. Get it out in the media. And of course, with social media these days, that's much, much easier than it used to be. In the 1980s, Bashar al-Assad's father could get away with massacring thousands of people in Hama because there was no social media. It was more or less hidden from the rest of the world. But these days, the fact that you have the media there, social media, which is disseminating all this information about these abuses that are going on all over the world, means that that repressive regimes cannot keep these things secret. And as we've seen in Egypt, in Tunisia, in one country after another, when these kinds of abuses become public, people react even more courageously and even more determinedly to press for, the vindication of their rights, the vindication of their right to freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. And that's very impressive. So getting it out there. And the third thing we do is we take this information to people powerful individuals and organizations and governments around the world who can make a difference. To the United Nations, to the International Criminal Court, to NATO if it comes to that. And that's where I think we can make a big difference as well, as just getting into the public information, but in bringing this information to governments and along with the information, realistic recommendations about what they can do. And sometimes it's rather limited, and it's actually becoming more limited in the Arab world. The US, the European Union are less influential than they used to be because of their appalling role in supporting dictatorships for years and years and years, and now those dictatorships have fallen. But still, you know, the UN and other groups and regional groups like the Arab League, to try to get them to react, to do what's necessary to improve the situation, to mitigate the abuses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have a lot of time, so maybe just a short intervention of Marwa. I'd like to hear you about now the building of the new state in those countries where uprisings or revolts took place. What's happening with the new constitution in Egypt and Tunisia, for instance, and the place of women in Arab society regarding to the religion also factor. Thank you.
I think this discussion about the constitution should be put in a broader context, and that comes up also from all these speakers' interventions, which I found very interesting. I think there's clearly a need for a change of paradigm internally, but also externally. And internally, Dr. Ebadi in today's session made very, very powerful points about the need for women and for the people from the region to be the ones interpreting their religion, and that Islam is not necessarily incompatible with democracy, change, the rule of law, etc. It's the patriarchal interpretation by patriarchal societies. And this could be done in an inclusionary rather than exclusionary process. Inclusion of women, of course, because they are pillars of these societies. And also inclusion of, we haven't talked about that, but there's also the religious minorities who are part of the society since centuries, millenniums as well. And so they constitute very important components of the society. What I mean by that also, it's an internal process. Also, the perception by the West of the region has traditionally been that it's a stagnant region because of religion, because of the culture, you know, the Orientalist perceptions of that. And that, in fact, the Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening have shown that this is wrong. People have risen against authoritarian regimes. They were truly bottom-up approaches, which have sometimes turned into conflict, unfortunately, and we can talk about that. But this paradigm shift is needed on both sides. And I think the internal, as much as the external, also strengthens the fact that the interpretation of Islam should be in the hands of the people themselves and not only political groups. And I think we need to make a difference, and I think Iman has hinted to that, between religious populism and religiosity. And you can have veiled women veiling themselves and being close to religion. It doesn't mean that they adhere to political Islam. But the Islamists managed after the revolution and during the revolution to capture the political momentum in that sense and to build on that. In the case of Syria, for example, the Muslim Brothers are almost, until recently, they were almost non-existent on the ground. Not only because they were exiled, even though you had religiosity within the population, women taking up more the veil, there was more social conservatism. So one has to differentiate that. And this is the importance also of local versus external actors, and I'll come to the constitution in that sense. The need for the revolutions to be powerful, legitimate, they need to remain in local hands. And this is a point that I would really strengthen at all levels. The problem with Islamists also taking up the ground is also because they're getting international support and foreign support in that sense. There is clearly an agenda here which is being implemented to fight the secular trends within the Arab region. And by the way, talking about the cultural paradigm, the voting rights were granted to women in 1949 in Syria, when they were granted in the 1970s in parts of Switzerland. So the region has known these political developments since before, and there's no need now to, you know, question political development because women have an important role in the public sphere. What we need now is to be careful about how the reform or the transition period is being handled. And writing the new constitution is a crucial area here because we're developing the social and political pact between the different citizens, women and men, but also all of the different components of the society. And here clearly, there is already a discrimination of women within the constituent assemblies. For example, in Egypt, you have only 7 women appointed out of a 100-member assembly. This is too little, of course. And in Tunisia, there were human rights activists who were pointing out that in Prime Minister Jebali's cabinet, there's a total of 2 women out of 25 ministers, when we know that women have had traditionally a very important role in Tunisia. Writing the constitution is also defining the relation between state and religion. And this is where the debates are also taking place, also in terms of Syria, because there's been like debates about writing a new constitution or going back to the constitution of the 1950s, adapting it. And again, women have had, because of so-called socialist, leftist, ideologies in the Arab world, they have given women rights. Now, with the new agendas and the new constitution, there is a democratic debate, which is healthy, which is good. The Islamists should have a say in the society. However, they should not be, being fueled also by external powers, getting money coming in, buying votes, allows for their voice to be heard more. And other examples of that is, Iman mentioned the role of, legal age for marriage being put down to 9 years old, as Dr. Ebadi also has mentioned. There's also the fact in Egypt, which is being debated, should we forbid or not trafficking of female minors as well? Should that be a discussion? And the role also of women's rights being framed, it has to be compatible with last week's discussion, Islamic jurisprudence. So this is also sending the wrong signal, I think, to women in the societies, to everybody in the society, and also to the Christians in the society, meaning what would be their position. And in terms of Syria, I would say this is why the situation has turned. We had a very powerful revolution, and my hope is that we still have a very powerful revolution. And again, the focus of the Western media is about the jihadists in Syria. One has to realize they represent only 10–12% of the rebel fighters. You have also a big chunk of fighters from within who are not foreign fighters, who do not necessarily have an Islamist agenda, and who are fighting for Syria, not for an Islamic state. You were talking about a state. It has to be a full-fledged, inclusionary state. And within these rebels, you do have also Alawites, you have Christians, you have different components. And what about women? Well, women in Syria have traditionally been very powerful. And I have former students of mine who are, trying to help the local coordination committees as women, Christians, different layers of identity. It doesn't matter. They're just Syrian citizens and activists, and hopefully this will also spread around the region in building this new state, which is a democratic state beyond the sectarian, religious, and also I would say gender differences, and enhancing women's rights.
Very quick. No, it's just that whenever people come and say, oh, the best thing that happened to Egypt, they got rid of the army because the army was a dictator. Well, we have now a religious militant dictator. We have a constitution that is controlled by men who are all fundamentalists and who want to reduce freedom. They are more dictatorial. They are trying to get rid of anybody who is not from the Muslim Brother or the Salafis. So I'm not so sure why everybody is happy that we got rid of an army, which I really don't have a problem with the army. But apart from that, why is this? And now we have a militant dictatorship, theocratic dictatorship, which is much worse than 100 armies. I think the only benefit of the revolution was that we have voice and confidence. But it's not true. We do not have democracy. They were not elected fairly. They were acting exactly like the Mubarak regime, and they are not a better model or even a better chance. And we should not be celebrating that we got rid of the army to get instead a militant theocracy.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we are very late. We'll just have time to take, I think, 3 questions in the audience. So if someone wants to begin.
Good afternoon. I have actually 2 questions for 2 of the panelists. The first one is regarding Annick Cogent's book which I read, and I was struck by what she said. And she wrote, what about the taboo today? Because you're saying in your book that today, even though a lot of people know about what happened, it's still a taboo for all those girls who's been raped constantly by the regime, by Gaddafi, and by all the fighters. Do you have your book's going to be released in Libya? I don't know if it's yet been released.
Not yet, but in a couple of weeks, yes.
You spoke with the government as well about that. What do they tell you about that? And my second question was for you, Iman. I just wanted to know what was the role of the Muslim sisterhood, because we don't hear so much about them, but what is their stand on especially women issues in Egypt? Thank you.
Well, you answer, or we take directly maybe one other or two other questions? Maybe we take the question, all of them. Thank you.
My question is mainly for Iman, who came out with many arguments I heard already in Tunisia, for example, about the fundamentalist kind of hijacking the revolutions and imposing their view, and with the help of funding from the Gulf countries or whatever. My question is, what are the others doing against that? Have the secular movements or the non-fundamentalists really made their job or worked well to oppose this?
And the last one? I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself, please. Sorry.
Good evening, Aurore Le Bon des Roches, LB Associé. It was much like regarding Tunisia. I'm really close to this country, and I know that the women I just treat like my sisters, they're from south of Tunisia, and they all voted Ennahda, because for them, Ennahda is not. It's just like if these religious person are there, then they have to be fair. They have to follow justice, and now they just told me, well, what about being more like radical Islamist? And they told me, well, you know, we want something like we are still vigilant. We keep our vigilance, and but nevertheless, what I feel is that even if I don't see more veiled person in South Tunisia, I did not see that. No much more burqa. But last 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine, she's Tunisian, and she was stopped at the airport, and the frontier police told him, no, you don't have the right to leave Tunisia. You have your passport, but I need your husband to come and to say he's okay. And Tunisia is the most advanced country in women's rights. They can vote, they can abort, they can divorce, they can take the pill. And I just feel like we are coming just not the right way. So it was just your feeling regarding that, and how can they react? How can they act?
Thank you. Annick, maybe?
Yes, something about the taboo. The taboo hasn't changed, of course. It's very, very heavy. It's still a question of death and life for lots of women. I'm careful with my words, of course, but I think that thousands of women have been raped during the revolution, but thousands have been raped before by Gaddafi and his gangs. And it's a tremendous number of people and women who are still hiding themselves with their little dirty secret. Just they live in fear that their secret is going to be discovered. And some women I talked to just told me that if you give any details that might make me being recognized, I would kill myself immediately. If my children or my husband, when they are married, most are not, but some are, of course, and I would kill myself. And so I was very careful not to give too many details about some women who gave me this testimony, because it is so strong and it is so dangerous. And you know, when a woman has been raped in a family, it's a big dishonor for all the families. That's why brothers are supposed to kill sometimes their sister. But when you say that in a country thousands of women have been raped, it's a big offense for the whole country. And when I talk to different people, and I know the the former president of the NTC, Mustafa Abdul Jalil, when he heard about what I was trying to do, he was just upset and didn't want to hear about that. And when I was talking about the woman being raped by Gaddafi himself, he was talking about prostitutes. You know, they didn't need consideration, and they didn't need to be helped. A lot of them need to be helped. They are just poor. Some have been pushed out of their families. Some are living abroad and just can't talk about that. It is just impossible. So I don't think my book is going to help them in a way, because they won't, and I won't encourage them to talk. It is so hard and it is so risky. But I hope that the fact it has been said, the word of some women have been taken in consideration, and I hope there will be debates in the parliament, in the government. I hope that, you know, there are some lights now in Libya. The election happened, and it's not the Islamists who won the power. 30 women have been elected, which is not nothing. I mean, it's 17%, which is just like in America in a way. It is a woman in this chaotic situation that who maintained the country in a kind of order. We would say that. I mean, they have created lots of non-profit organizations, etc. Lots of solidarity between women now. They use internet a lot, and they inform themselves. They use internet to unify, and at night they change a lot. It's just unbelievable what's happening at night on internet, on Facebook, etc. It's fascinating, and some really have ambition, some women, and I hope they will try to help the others. But you know, the truth is that most of the women I'm talking about, the women who have been raped, will stay with their secret.
Couple of things. The role of women, the Muslim sisterhood, I'll just give you examples and you will judge. Well, we have a very famous Ayman, parliamentarian, because we had only 8 women win in parliament for different reasons, mainly because they repealed the quota, and they did, anyway, I will not get into it, but this is not real democracy. However, Ayman is one of the women who is now even in the constitution group, and everybody's happy, oh, we have women in the constitution group. Well, she thinks if you are being harassed, it's your mistake. And of course, if you're being raped, you must be a prostitute. So this is what she thinks. Ayman and her colleagues, they are 4 women, they believe that, of course, marriage at 9 years old is very important and good, and they're quoted and they're videotaped. I'm not gossiping about them, not lying. Because if you have your period by that time and you have puberty, then at 9 years of age it's good, so that we can avoid all the harassment. So if the girls are better attired, why are you only covering your hair? You should really have a complete cover. And then if you're 9 years old. And the third thing is, they are now the most democratic party of the Muslim Brotherhood, called the Hurriya wa Adala, Freedom and Justice Party, which everybody in the West seems to like. However, this group, a woman is going to run to be the head of it. And of course, everybody's saying, what a great thing. That means they're really pro-women. She said, I had the approval of my husband and my young son. So she's our very nice friends from Qatar. But anyway, the second one, let's not get into this. I'm already not going to come into the country. So the second thing, what are the others doing? What are the others doing? There are groups. There are the kids, some of the kids who were like the most secular kids in the revolution are completely devastated, because the army and the Muslim Brotherhood, the first 6 months after the revolution, took them into one meeting after the other, and they were earning money. So a lot of them left. Some of them were bought off by the politics, some of them, so there was kind of divide and rule. Some of our leaders thought that they wanted a piece of the pie, so they bought into the system, but then they got, of course, the biggest shock because nobody got them in. And some of them are just so occupied by hating the old regime that they're not doing anything else. And some were still fighting now and trying to unite ourselves after the backlashes. So, you know, this is important. Why women vote Nahda and why women vote Muslim Brothers? People do not understand. We do not have a history of democracy. We do not have a history of knowing whom are we fight. So if, for example, let's say that Marwa and I are running for office. None in particular area. They don't know both of us. So they will try to ask, So Marwa will look like a decent woman with her hair covered, and she looks like she looks like their neighbor. Maybe their neighbor knows her, and the guy in the mosque is telling them Marwa is a nice person. They will vote for her because she looks like she's a good woman. But I look too foreign for them. I don't look like them, or they don't know who I am. Not only this, but even in Tunisia, and I will not even give them. And I'm broke, exactly. But not only this, I don't have the money. In Tunisia, for example, when they were electing the committee for the parliament, for the constitution, I want you to know that the Nahda won 1.2 million, and the liberals and the progressive won 800,000. But you know that there was 1.3 votes, 1.3 million votes that were lost because they constituted 100 groups. So one of the problems of the liberals and one of the problems why we don't win is we were divided. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie and nobody wanted to be there. So that, I mean, I'm going to be as brief as possible, but really, if you counted the number of liberals that won in Tunisia or Egypt, if they were united, they would have been more than the others.
Just want to add one point, Sophia, if you may. There's one thing striking here is that often women are the safeguards of patriarchal societies, and I think this is where we need to work also on, because you have women telling you, but this is how the system should work, and I don't want to be dishonored if my daughter or whatever. So they are the safeguards, and we should focus on men, but also on some generations of women as well.
Of course, I was just about to give it to you, and just before that, I will let you answer about Tunisia, but I would just say just a word. I saw more veiled women veiled in industries also. I saw collective weddings this summer in Djerba, for instance. I saw teachers in schools separate girls and boys. This is a big social and political pressure. It's in the whole society. It's not just coming from the Islamic power now. It's something that is and that's, I think. But I also saw that the secular party are more than if they are divided, but together they are like 30% in the actual assembly, when Ennahda is 40. So and I also felt a freedom I never felt in Tunisia before. People are talking in the street; they're not still looking at the back when they're talking to you now, and there is something really new. I never met anybody who told me it was better before. I think that's a real important point.
Yeah, I want to answer your question about the Islamists in Tunisia, but also answer you, Iman, about the military. As I said earlier, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint, right? All these countries have been dominated for the last 30 years by military dictatorships, autocracies, repressive monarchies of one kind or another. And that has actually led to the situation that we were in just prior to the Arab uprisings that we saw. One of the features, particularly in Egypt and Tunisia, of the way in which the government's propaganda was, as I said, that they said that if it wasn't for us, it would be the Islamists. And as a result of that, they actually secretly supported the Islamists. The Muslim Brotherhood was although they were banned, they were tolerated. They were put in prison, but they were allowed to also sit in parliament. So they were the only opposition group. The Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, is the largest NGO in the Arab world, right? It's been allowed to become like that because Mubarak and Ben Ali's threat, of what would come if it wasn't for them, wouldn't be credible unless those people existed, right? But the secular liberal opposition didn't really have a chance. It didn't have roots. It was completely out. So it's going to take a long, long time. And these are, let's face it, fairly conservative societies, right? So I would say that the first step has to be to get rid of military rule. You cannot get anywhere, because you cannot have military rule and democracy. Mubarak proved that by winning by 99% at every single election for the last 30 years, right? So that's the first step. You have to get rid of military rule. Now, okay, now you've got the problem of the Islamists, right? Now, as a human rights organization, we don't take political positions. We're against military rule because we know where that leads in terms of human rights abuses, and it's just basic it's inherently an abusive system. If the Islamists come to power in a democratic system, then that's something we have to live with. But, and this is the big but, you cannot have this kind of majoritarianism which we appear to be moving towards in some of these countries, in Tunisia and Egypt in particular. But let's wait and see, and we haven't got there yet, but it looks as if it's moving towards a majoritarian system, whereby the majority takes power, they're Islamists, and then they trample on the rights of everyone else. Democracy is not majoritarianism. Democracy is elections and protection of the rights of the minorities, protection of the rights to privacy, protection of the right to freedom of expression, protection of the right to blaspheme if you want, protection of minorities. That's very, very important, and it looks like we may be moving in the direction in Egypt and Tunisia where those rights are actually threatened. So what can we do? Again, I go back to what I was saying before. We need to monitor all this very carefully. We need to monitor the behavior of these governments as they come to power. We need to document what they're doing. We need to analyze, as we did, Human Rights Watch did last week. We put out a long press release analyzing the draft constitution. And we picked up exactly the points that were wrong with it. We said what was right with it, which was that the new constitution under Article 47 prohibits the use of emergency courts. This has been a huge problem throughout the Mubarak era. Emergency courts leading to unfair convictions and using evidence that has been produced under torture. The new constitution, to give its credit, does actually rule that out, and also rules out the use of military courts for civilians. That's been a huge problem in the last few years, particularly since the SCAF, the Supreme Council, the junta came to power in February 2011. But, and this is a huge but, of course, there are a lot of very, very serious problems with the new constitution, as we pointed out in our press release. Women's rights, children's rights, freedom of religion and expression, all those things under attack, and even the issues of torture and trafficking, which you would have thought the Islamists, having been subjected themselves to torture, would have been a bit more careful about prohibiting in the new constitution. There's not a strong enough prohibition. So we put out this press release, and what happened? Actually, because you now have a relatively free media in Egypt, our researcher in Cairo, Hiba Morayev, was invited last night on a very popular talk show, which lasted 2.5 hours, to talk about the new constitution, to debate it with she was without her veil, and you also had a Salafi, and you had other representatives of the Egyptian political scene. And they were having a healthy debate about this new constitution. What's important, as I said, and I'm going to repeat this again because it's so important, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. We're not going to solve these problems overnight. But and what's really important is to remember that underlying these problems, as we said at the beginning, there are very serious social and economic problems. When the Muslim Brotherhood, as they will, fail to actually address those problems, then there will be more people out in the street, and they will be voted out of power if that opportunity still exists. So economic and social development are absolutely crucial. Those things are going to take a long time. And as Shireen Ebadi was saying earlier, education. Education is absolutely fundamental to all this, but it's not going to happen, between now and tomorrow.
Can you help us have a transparent election 23rd of October in Tunisia?
Nobody can help you except yourselves.
But
He'll try.
Outside.
I'm sorry, we're really short time now, but I'm just going to ask each of you to have your last word. What's most important for you?
Very difficult in a few words. I would say the power of the people, the power of the women, and I'm still hopeful for change. It's going to take time, but still there's something which is set in motion, which we would not have thought or even imagined in our dreams a few years ago. And I believe in the future, but it's going to be a chaotic and a long-term process.
I think we've gained our voice and our pride, and I think we will not give it up. But I also think that please do not judge us. people ask me, will there be a law to veil all Egyptian women like in Iran? No, there will not be a law. So yes, there might not be an emergency court, but people are arrested right and left now and being kidnapped, and people are being tortured. So it doesn't matter what they write in the papers, it matters what really happens. The Islamic fundamentalists are autocratic, and I am not optimistic about the near future. I am optimistic about the long-term future, because we will not give up. But please, do not just judge by what you think democracy is. We don't have a democracy, and they did not come. They were not elected by the people.
Oh, just a word to say that I'm rather optimistic for the Libyan. Also, it's going to be tough and very difficult. And what happened, you know, when the first declaration of liberation by the former president was just terrible. He failed to acknowledge the women's contribution to the war, and he even announced that Libya would reinstitute polygamy, which was just a terrible shock for the women. But still, I'm very fascinated to see that a lot of women have ambition. There is more solidarity than I thought before, and when I say that some have ambitions now to do things and to create new things in Libya, is to say that before they had to keep a low profile. One was telling me we had to look like ghosts in different ways. You know, the way they were dressing, because they had not to show themselves. A woman who would be too beautiful would be kidnapped immediately and taken to Gaddafi, so that was just terrible. But a woman who was too brilliant, too educated, or who would speak in public would be noticed also and brought to Gaddafi or his gang. So now at least this is finished. It won't be the same in any case. And I'm very glad to see that lots of women want to be educated. They go to the university. At least they were allowed to go. It was risky, but they could. And now they want to do something and take part in the government. So yeah, there's some hope.
Thank you. Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is that this is a period of great hope for the region, but also a period of great fear, and especially, I think, for women's rights. There is hope there for women's rights. It's not as if women's rights were wonderfully protected before 2011. You know, and let's remember that, as we heard earlier, you know, women's rights throughout the world are, you know, always under threat, frankly, because men are what they are. And as we were told at the plenary session, you need to go and talk to women where they are, right? And so why not go to Cairo and Tunis and have the Women's Forum there?
As a journalist, I try to go on and to write stories about the people we met in those countries, of course. I want to thank you all. I know it's too short, it's too brief. We didn't have time to talk about all the important issues. I'd like to thank the Women's Forum for inviting us also. And thank you very much. I love you. Thank you.
We want to thank our token man too. Not only is he the only man, but I just kind of jumped on it.